Okay, good evening, everyone. This is Sachin Karnik here. Today is the 24th of November, 2024. I know we are continuing our series on religious explorations, specifically the religious traditions of the world. Just a couple of disclaimers here before I begin with today's presentation. The first point is that Angel Wing LLC is not promoting or criticizing any religious tradition, any spiritual tradition, or meditative tradition in the world. Our goal here is to provide exploratory ideas as factually as possible. And then whenever I give you my perspective, I'll make that clear that this is my perspective only. You are invited as listeners and as participants to develop your own perspectives, and that's what this is about. So this is not an attempt to try to convince anyone of any one perspective versus another, given this very difficult and esoteric subject about the religious traditions of the world. Before we begin today's presentation, which will be on the Old Testament, we're going to start with the Hebrew Bible. We're going to get into the Hebrew Bible. I suspect it'll take us good 6 months. Probably more than that. It will probably take us 6 months just to cover the first 5 books, and it might take us 6 months just to cover Genesis. So I don't know how much time this is all going to take. This is not a question of me covering a lot of information in a short time. It is better to cover less information with a much greater in-depth contemplation than just to cover volumes of information. There's a lot of information on religious traditions. It's extensive. People have spent their entire life on just one area of one tradition, and still that's not enough, right? So we will do something very extraordinary. Now, I will try to pull many ideas together here, do comparative analysis also, and try to present this as objectively as possible. Now, before we begin with today's presentation, I want to express my gratitude to all of you for your open-mindedness, for your participation in this very interesting path to understand these ideas. And then also to point out certain basic approaches before we get into the Hebrew Bible. And that is that life is a phenomenal mystery. Phenomenal mystery. I've created some recordings on this before, the Mystery of Life series. You can listen to some of those if you want some background on that. But a couple of just very quick points. The mystery of where did we come from? What were we before we came into this world? Were we anything at all? That's mystery number 1. Mystery number 2, what happens after this body goes away? After it dies? What happens after that? Mystery number 3, is there a creator? Is there a divine being? Is there a supreme Lord? Is there a supreme reality? What is that actually? Is there even such a thing? So these are basic questions. Now, as we begin the Hebrew Bible, and I'm going to call it the Hebrew Bible because I'm going to present this from a Jewish perspective as much as I can. I'm by no means any expert in this area, but I'll continue to do my research on it and try to present this as objectively as possible. In the Christian tradition, this is called the Old Testament. In the Jewish tradition, this is called the Hebrew Bible. The sequencing of the books is a little bit different in both traditions, but the books are nearly the same. And we're going to get into all that stuff. Now, to begin with, I want to show you a couple of things here online. That the Hebrew Bible, and you'll see actually the names in Hebrew, they're written in the English language, but they're the Hebrew words. So the Hebrew Bible is known as Tanakh, Tanakh. I think maybe that's how it's pronounced. It's traditionally divided into 3 major sections: the Torah, instruction or law, the prophets, and the writings. Below is the list of all the books that are arranged in the Hebrew Bible reflecting the Jewish tradition. So these are the books. The Torah is the first 5 books: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And then you've got all the books after that. So it's an extensive process to go through. Today, we are going to dive into the very first part, that is Genesis. So as you may remember, the first 5 books are called the Torah, and the Torah is regarded as a divine revelation to Moses on Mount Sinai, and serves as both a narrative of origins and a perspective and a prescriptive guide for moral and ritual living. Let's understand that point clearly. So this is a revelation-based tradition, from a tradition point of view, that this is divine revelation, that there is a being that is God, that is called Elohim, that is the name is Yahweh also. Different names are there in the original Hebrew. And there's revelation given to the mind of Moses that he is in communion. So it's very interesting. This is how the tradition goes. So it is divine revelation to Moses on Mount Sinai, and serves both as a narrative of origins, meaning where did we all come from, the origins of the universe, the galaxies, the creation itself, and a prescriptive guide for moral and ritual living. How should we live? How ought we live our life? Both points are there in the Torah in general, but specifically in the Genesis narrative. Right? So these 2 points, please keep these 2 points in mind. This is revelation. This is not where, as far as we know, that it's not like in the Eastern traditions where you've got sages sitting in the Himalayas or someplace and doing some type of meditation, yogic meditation. Maybe Moses was doing something like that, but we don't know that. We don't have any evidence of that. So the point here is that somehow this revelation happened to him on Mount Sinai, right? And then he writes down this revelation in these 5 books, and these 5 books are called the Torah. Now, it's very interesting. The Torah is central, meaning its centrality to Jewish life and thought cannot be overstated, as it provides a theological, legal, and ethical framework. It provides all 3 frameworks. There's a theological framework, there's a legal framework, there's an ethical framework that defines the covenantal relationship between Yahweh, or God, of Israel and the Jewish people. So it's a covenant. Covenant is an agreement. This is very interesting how these traditions, all 3 Abrahamic traditions, started like this. This is the beginning of it. So it's a covenant that through Moses as a prophet, who is bringing out these 5 books given by God, and all 3 books have these 3 components. It's got theology, meaning it's got the understanding of what is God and how to connect with God and things like that. All that, there's all kinds of theology in that. That's what we're going to be focused on most. Then there's legal aspects to it. There's like laws that are set up. It's much more black and white, the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible. And there's an ethical framework also. So there's 10 commandments really set up this ethical framework. All right. And then, of course, it is a covenant. It's a covenantal relationship with the Lord, with the God of Israel, the Jewish people. All right. So Genesis is the first book, and it begins with the story of creation, laying the cosmological and theological groundwork for the entire biblical narrative. So the entire biblical narrative is based on this foundation that is laid in Genesis, right? So I'm not going to try to pronounce the Hebrew language because I don't know how to pronounce it. I'll just speak the English words instead. Genesis opens the Hebrew Bible with a narrative that establishes the cosmological and theological foundations of both the biblical worldview and the covenantal relationship between God of Israel and humanity. The story of creation in Genesis is not merely an account of the origins of the universe. It is a deeply theological declaration of the sovereignty and intentionality of Yahweh, or God, as the creator of all things. The opening words, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth," encapsulates a profound theological assertion that all existence originates from the divine will and is brought into being by a transcendent yet immanent God. This declaration stands in contrast to the polytheistic myths of the ancient Near East, emphasizing this singularity and omnipotence of Yahweh. Let me talk about this a bit, then we'll get into the verse itself in more detail. Before the time of Moses, many traditions, sub-traditions were around where they were polytheistic in nature. So if you're taking notes or keeping track of this is almost going to be like a university class, so so keep track of the terminology. Polytheism is different from monotheism. So the monotheistic doctrine is set up by Moses in the Torah, in the very first book of Genesis. What is polytheism? That there are many deities, many gods. That the universe is controlled by many different forces of nature or divine beings, not just one. But eventually, as time went on and as the Hebrew tradition developed, because the worship of the one God, the one truth or the one God was there even before Moses, but he really brought this out through his own communion or experience with that divinity on Mount Sinai. And then this revelation came to him. And from there, the very first point that is written here is that there is this beginning, that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, this point that is written here, the actual Hebrew that is there is this. It's what you can see here in black and white. I wouldn't even know how to pronounce that, so I'm not going to try. But what we're going to see here is the breakdown of each of those original words. This is Genesis 1.1. And we're going to spend some time on this today. Probably the next couple of weeks will be spent only on this verse. It's very, very interesting and it's very powerful. So in the beginning, the prefix BE means in. And then if you go through the translation there, that together, that Hebrew word conveys the idea of the very first moment or the origin of time. This word introduces the concept of a linear timeline and the initiation of creation. So the actual word is there in the Hebrew. The actual Hebrew you can see there also. So now, what is this all about? What is the mystery behind this? Now, again, I'm going to give you some of my commentary on this one. That this is where time is being created. That in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If we break this down further, that the beginning simply means, or it means that there is a first moment, meaning that time is created. The word introduces the concept of a linear time, that the linear time is created. And the initiation of creation. Now, this raises a whole lot of questions. I'm going to get to those questions in just a moment. Look at point number 2. The verb bara, B-A-R-A, is unique in the biblical Hebrew. It specifically refers to the creation by God, implying an act of bringing something into existence from nothing, creatio ex nihilo. That's a famous statement. It reflects divine power, emphasizing that only God has the ability to create in this absolute sense. So we're going to talk about just these 2 points today. All right, first of all, let's consider time. We have experience of time. We experience time psychologically, calendar-wise. We experience it in our own way. But the point that is being made in the very first verse, Genesis 1.1, is that time itself is being created. So we, as human beings in this world, we create. We are inventors and we create and we modify the nature and whatnot. We are also creators in our own way, but we create within the framework of time. God, the way God is described, or Elohim means king, and we'll get to those words also, or Yahweh. I'm just going to say God. That supreme being is the creator that creates time. All kinds of questions come about at this point. Why? We ask the question, why if there is such a being, what is the nature of that being? Question number 1. Assuming there is a being, why? What is the reason to create? And at the same time, the power to create. So is God a being that is just some kind of an abstract, undifferentiated, homogeneous consciousness, as the non-dualistic tradition would say? I'm going to do some comparative philosophy here with you guys. Or is it actually a being with form? Like, we have a form, and it says later on in the Bible, God creates the man in his own image. Well, if that's so, then God should have a form also. Well, if that's true, that means that God also has a form? It's very interesting. Now, it says that, we'll look at the verses later, but God creates man, he says, in our image. It's a plural word. Some translations say my image. God created man in his image, like this, with a capital H. But the actual Hebrew word is our. It's a plural word. The Christians interpret that as being the Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. The three persons in one, not three aspects of one. Trinity concept is that there's the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. That these are three persons of the one. God is one. They're not, but they are three persons in one. So the word "our" is interpreted in the Christian tradition that way. It's very interesting. You see? Now, it depends on how you're looking at it. It could also mean, from a Hindu point of view, that it means that there is consciousness and the energy of consciousness. Shiva and Shakti, two words that are used in the Indian tradition, but interestingly, the word Shiva is also used in the Jewish tradition. When a person passes away and they sit for Shiva, because they're sitting, it's like a kind of a respectful, prayerful, gathering together. They use exactly the same word, Shiva. And Shiva is considered to be the god of annihilation or death in the Hindu Trinity. There are some interesting parallels. So the point here, it raises the question, the creation of time is a transcendental, metaphysical act, assuming that has happened. So theologians, Jewish theologians, Christian theologians, Islamic theologians, and many others have tried to interpret the actual metaphysical reality of what is God. Metaphysical meaning beyond time, beyond thought, beyond creation. In the beginning, meaning beginning means it's the beginning of time. It's the creation of time. There's a beginning, and then the linear time is going to start. The heavens and earth and galaxies and cosmos, and you can interpret all this thing that way, that there's a creative bang, if you want to use the word scientific word, big bang, or what is the mystery behind this? What could that possibly be? We could theorize, we could hypothesize that Moses, who is in communion with God, God is speaking to him, he is possibly, and this is only pure theory, we'll have to go into Jewish mysticism. When we get to Jewish mysticism, the Kabbalah tradition and the Zohar. The Zohar is a tremendous mystical scripture, which we will look at in detail later on. But that is referring to what Moses may have potentially experienced in the transcendental dimension. So the story is that he goes to Mount Sinai and God speaks to him through that burning bush, and there's a transcendental communion. It's not happening in the normal fabric of time, the way we consider time. Nor is it happening with our normal senses, our usual senses. We would have to conjecture. This is only my commentary, and the Jewish mystics have spoken a lot about this. A lot. It's very, very fascinating. What was going on between Moses and God? What is he experiencing? What is that? Now, if you were to use some of the Eastern language, is he going into some samadhi, like a trance? Is he going into some kind of a higher consciousness, out of our normal consciousness, and he has communion? But there's no documentation that he did any yogas or anything like that. So what was it that brought about the communion? Was it just the divine will that this is a prophet that has been sent to liberate people, to serve, to liberate the masses of people who were held as slaves and who were suffering so much? So a great being descends or is sent by God. But see, that's similar to what the Gita says also. The Bhagavad Gita says that from time to time, the incarnations of God come, or great sages come to liberate the humanity again and again and again. That idea is there in the Gita. So there are some interesting parallels. I'm not trying to fuse it all together. Believe me, I'm not trying to do that. These are definitely distinctive traditions, and I have no intention of trying to fuse them all into some one ball. That is not my intention at all, and that would be doing a disservice to all of them to try to do that, to try to fuse them into some concocted thing that I have created. No, I'm not going to do that. I don't believe in doing that. I think we should be true to each tradition in its own way. And I think there are definitely parallels. There are great sages who have tried to see the commonalities and try to see, how they could potentially be leading to the same truth. Maybe.
We lost your voice.
So my point is that there are those, I just want to mention this to you also. There are those who have attempted to synchronize and to kind of homogenize all the religions of the world into one. But by doing that, you kind of lose the distinctiveness of each one. And the people in those religions don't like that also. Now, and then there are those who are only interested in showing how they all differ. You see, so there's a middle ground here. The middle ground is where do they connect? Rather than showing how they all homogenize into some homogenized mashed potato, kind of thing, or showing constantly only how they are different from each other, divisiveness, why not try to see where they connect with each other? It's interesting. One analogy which comes to my mind, it came into my mind some years back, if you have pieces of yarn, and we'll get back to the Genesis thing in just a moment. Just want to mention this point. Let's say you go to the store and you buy different colors of yarn: red color, white color, blue color, yellow color, whatever, 7, 8 different colors, and you make a nice stitched fabric. Maybe make a very nice, like a throw or something like that. Make some really beautiful yarn piece with all different colors. Can you do it? Yes, you can stitch it together. You can see, and all those points. All those points can connect together, definitely. But it doesn't mean that one yarn becomes the other one. They still are separate. They still have their own beauty, their own uniqueness. So the notion of just fusing everything together may do a disservice to the original traditions. And the notion of just showing constant divisiveness and difference also does a disservice to the pursuit of truth. So anyway, having said that, let's get back to this question about time. What was happening between Moses and God? Very interesting. What type of prayer was he doing? Did he do something to reach that stage of realization? Or is it purely revelation? And the way the Jewish tradition talks about it, as far as my study goes, and if anyone wants to correct me, please do so. I'm happy to hear any corrections or any other perspectives on this. That this is revelation. It's just pure grace. It's just grace. It's nothing other than that. This revelation, that which is beyond, that which is divine, that which is transcendent, that which is, when Moses asked, "What is thy name?" He says, "I am that I am." Existence. How can the human mind even grasp what that reality is? So it's not possible for the human mind that is within the framework of time to touch that which is beyond time. This is another interpretation of this first verse, Genesis 1.1. That you cannot touch that which is beyond time through any mental activity. Then what are we left with? And I'm presenting this really just from my studies of the Hebrew tradition, that this is grace. It is revelation. It becomes a covenant eventually. It becomes an agreement that God is teaching Moses, telling Moses, this is what you have to follow. You tell everybody else this, and that is a relational bond with God. That you follow life this way, and then God shows up again and again in the Hebrew Bible, and there's experiences individuals have. He's giving them teachings. He's very active. So he's got an immanent nature and a transcendent nature. Both points are shown there. So maybe these are more allegorical stories. There's some historical part to it also. Please do keep this in mind too. That we could say that the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible, it has multiple components. It has a historical component. It has a metaphorical component. It has a metaphysical component. It has a relational component between Moses and God and then all the others that have come after him. It has a component where God's obedience is asked. The entire story about Eve eating the forbidden fruit, we're going to spend some good time on that one. Right now, we're only talking about Genesis 1.1. And you see how much is involved in this. And it has all of these components. So if we focus on what is Moses' experience on Mount Sinai, what is it actually? How can that be? How is it that he's seeing something extraordinary? What would that be? Now, the language that is used at that time is the Hebrew language. It is revealed to him, and then it's been recorded meticulously. So the perspective in the Hebrew tradition is that this is God's words through Moses. It's not that Moses woke up one day and dreamt up some of these 5 books and wrote them down. That's not what the tradition says. It's actually that supreme reality, that divinity that is coming into the mind of Moses, revealed to his mind, and it transforms him completely. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It raises the question, why? Now, there are 3 major perspectives that from a comparative religion point of view. Why is there even creation? There might be more than 3, but I can at least present to you 3 major perspectives. One perspective is that God is one. God is completely alone, one. And creates the many, but remains the one. The one remains the one, but creates the many. Why? Why should there be creation of the many? Many answers are there. Just divine will. We don't know the answer. We cannot know what is that answer. But there's answers that have been given by various individuals. It is a divine play. That is, in Indian tradition, this is called Leela, L-E-E-L-A. Leela means divine play. That's another answer. There's another answer also. This is an answer that it's not so clear in the books of the Bible this way, what I'm going to present here, but that is just a possibility I'm going to point out there, something to think about. And that answer has to do with 3 points: God, God's power, and infinite number of monadic souls residing in that power. This is called qualified non-dualism in the Indian tradition of Vedanta. And this perspective, you can probably find some justification for this in the Bible throughout. But one would have to really kind of look through it carefully. I mean, you never want to do something called text torturing. Text torturing means you start out with an idea, this is what I believe, and I'm going to just find that, and then state that in the Bible or in the other texts that this idea that I believe in is in there, and to manipulate the text that way to fit my belief. That's called text torturing, by the way. Technically, it's kind of a strong word, but people do it all the time. To impose the prefixed belief onto a text. So I'm not going to do that, obviously. But I'm going to provide just an interpretation, a possibility here as to why the creation has happened. So, assuming that there are infinite number of monadic souls that are present within the power of God, but they are not God, they are separate from God, and God wants to take them out of that of that layer, of that power, and bring them to him. Now, see, this what I'm telling you is not written in the Bible like this. So I don't want to say that it's written like this. But nonetheless, I'll put it out there anyway. Is that what's happened? That's why the creation is there? So he creates because he wants to take souls out of ignorance, out of bondage, out of this elusive power into where he is? Is that what we are? We are those bound souls, something that is, something that is separate, eternally separate from God. Now, another possibility is that when, as it says, God created the heavens and the earth, he created everything. There's only one being that created everything. So if he's creating everything, he's creating with his power, use some logic, then is it so that God becomes that which he has created? Adam and Eve and all the different animals, the story, the Garden of Eden, the story and all that. Is it that divine being has become everything? Then if that's the case, then is it so that that same being has become the fallen angels and become Lucifer and become the material world and become everything? Is that so? That would mean that God degrades into ignorance, into the fall? How can that be? That would be contrary to the notion of God. So this is interesting. So the transcendence and immanence. Transcendence means eternally beyond. He remains eternally beyond, but creates. Is he present? I'm just saying he, just for language purposes. Is he present in the creation? According to the Abrahamic traditions, he is immanently present. Immanence, meaning omnipresent in the creation, present everywhere. But not as become everything. It remains transcendent, yet is immanent. See this point. Okay, now let's take a look. Let's go back here to the actual Hebrew language here. It's very, very interesting. Now, okay, so the creation has been initiated for any of these reasons, or maybe some reasons we don't know. Whatever it may be, assuming that there is a being that is God, right? That it's not just some mythological idea. Now, point number 2 here, the word bara is unique in the biblical Hebrew. It refers to the creation by God, implying an act of bringing something into existence from nothing. Creatio ex nihilo. What does that mean? Coming, something out of nothing. Now, this is interesting. This is where a lot of the Jewish mysticism also comes into the picture. We'll get to that later on. That there's a great void. There's an infinite void. And this is similar to some of the Eastern traditions, the notion of shunya, S-H-U-N-Y-A. Shunya also means zero. The word, the zero means nothing. So the notion of void or nothing is also here in the very first verse of the Bible. That creation out of nothing would mean that within that nothing, which is absolute darkness, absolute void, there's no existence, non-existence, or within the non-existence, existence comes about. It's like if it's dark outside, 2 a.m., nighttime, and the sun just cracks open. My God, there is the sunlight. The darkness dissipates. It's a creation. The day is being created. Something like that. It could also refer to what many mystics have talked about is the great void. That there is a void that yogis and mystics come upon before they can see what is God. But it is within that great void where nothing exists, that one is stuck inside that void. So this is a bit of metaphysics, actually, and there's a lot of Jewish metaphysics on this point, that God creates out of nothing, meaning that God is beyond that nothing. It's actual existence is there. God is a being. There's actual existence to God, not this material existence like our existence. It is a divine being, a divine existence, something that is non-material. It's the nature of God, the substance that is God, is not a physical substance. So the notion that there is creation out of nothing, it means that there is divine power. It reflects divine power, emphasizing that only God has the ability to create in this absolute sense, bara. This absolute sense, creatio ex nihilo, this absolute sense, because he is the supreme majestic power, and that's the third word here, Elohim. So the word Elohim is a plural form in Hebrew, but is used here as a singular noun when referring to the one God. This grammatical construct hints at the majesty and all-encompassing nature of the divine. The word suggests power, authority, transcendence, emphasizing God's sovereignty over creation. Now let's really unpack this carefully. That although it's a plural word referring to some type of plurality in the existence of God, but it is a singular noun, that there's one, it hints at majesty. It's spoken at our level, at our human level, to give us an inclination of the complete sovereignty of God's power. The complete sovereignty. For example, when we try to understand this in modern way, scientific studies have shown billions of galaxies, unending number of galaxies. But is it all happening just randomly? Or is there a supreme intelligence, supreme sovereign power who has complete sovereignty over all of it? And that is God. That is Elohim. That is what the word Elohim refers to. Amazing. And there are similar words like that in other theistic traditions also. So if there is total sovereignty, that means that there is total doership. This is interesting. If we say that there's total sovereignty, as the word Elohim represents, does it mean that God is doing everything? And is that so? In one sense, we would have to say that yes, he is, or that reality is the all-doer. But then does that mean in the creation, when the creation happens, which we'll get to later, the story goes, Eve and Adam, and they were given a command by God not to eat the tree, the forbidden tree, right? The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And we're going to spend a lot of time on that, on what that tree is, what that fruit is, why it was forbidden, what the story behind that is, what is the metaphysics potentially. It will take a long time to unpack that. But it is an indication that even free will to those beings that are created is granted. Like in our lives, do we have free will? We have a sense of free will at least. But at the same time, there is great power through which the universes have been created. But interestingly enough, and we'll get to this when he talks about the ex nihilo, creation, but he talks about the creation, there's a mention about Eden, the creation of the heaven, where God and all the creatures and everybody's living in beautiful communion. There's a forbidden tree. Adam and Eve are also created, be fruitful and multiply. That edict is there before Eve eats the forbidden fruit. So there's all kinds of propagation of the species going on. But after the forbidden fruit is eaten, both Adam and Eve become very aware of their maleness, femaleness. They cover their sexual organs. So many things happen at that point. And then that story is a fascinating story. My only point right now is that, is there free will? If God is all sovereign, Elohim, then Is he, and if he is doing everything, I'm just using he just for the purpose of language. If he is doing everything, then is he everything? He himself is everything. That would be non-dualism. That would be pantheism. That would be monism. And that's not accepted. That theory is not accepted by the Jewish tradition, the Christian tradition, or the Islamic tradition. But the mystical traditions in these three come somewhere near that, kind of. Very, very interesting. So if God is created out of nothing, everything, then using his power, his sovereignty, but God remains independent. This notion is there in many of the devotional strands in Hinduism. So when we say Hinduism, that's just a word. It's not no such thing as Hindu or ism, actually, but that's a different subject altogether. That's just a word given by the British people. There's no word like that anywhere in that tradition. So the strands, the devotional traditions within that tradition that we call Hinduism, come very close to these monotheistic traditions. Not only close, they are monotheistic. I won't go into the details of that now. So monotheism is being established here. Now, it is already 7:44. I'm going to make a couple more points. Otherwise, this can go on for another 10, 15, 20 hours just on Genesis 1. We'll not even come to the end of it. It is so amazing. And there are so many commentaries. There are so many scholars that have written on these subjects. It is absolutely mind-boggling and mind-blowing. So we have to give homage and respect to that. But we'll do what we can in the limited time we have. One or two quick points. Is this notion of, it's not, we can say notion, this notion of grace. This word grace is extremely important in the Abrahamic traditions and the devotional strands in the East. That there's revelation. There is the revealing of truth. Truth is revealing. Like Jesus says, I am the truth, I am the way. That comes in the New Testament. So that truth is revealed through that body that is Jesus. That truth is revealed through the body that is Moses. It's a revelation. As opposed to intellectual, fantasy-driven, concocted ideas. So that's a big difference between revelation, which is grace-based revelation, and hence salvation. The doctrine of salvation, I believe, is called theodicy. We're going to talk. There's a lot of technical terms that are going to come your way. This is going to be like a university class. By the time you guys are all done, we'll have degrees in religious studies. So anyway, a lot of fun stuff is coming up. We just kind of cracked the surface on this one. Just cracked the ice a little bit on Genesis 1 today, 1.1. And we'd like to open it up for conversation, discussion, dialogue, questions, anything. Please. I hope you found the presentation meaningful.